A Valley woman's fierce fight in court after her ongoing legal battle with her ex-husband. It was ruled she will not be able to keep her frozen embryos.
Yeah, this is a story a bit controversial, that ruling from Arizona's Supreme Court. So back in 2014, Ruby Torres was diagnosed with cancer. These are pictures from her battle there. But before she started treatment, she went through in vitro fertilization. She and her husband signed an agreement, though, that if they ever were to break up, they would need each other's consent to use these frozen embryos. So later they did get divorced, unfortunately, and the matter was taken to court. And yesterday, the state Supreme Court ruled the 7 frozen embryos would have to be donated. Torres expressed her disappointment after the ruling. Listen.
It doesn't seem fair. It doesn't seem right. Somebody else gets to dictate my right to have a child, to bring a baby into this world. All I want was that opportunity to try.
So this case, of course, sparking a lot of outrage across our state, leading to Arizona passing a new law last year. The legislation says in the case of divorce, the state must award frozen embryos to the spouse who plans to use them to have a baby after the couple splits up. So a lot of chatter about this. People have a lot to say on both sides of this issue.
And setting precedent there, especially changing the law. So this morning, Arizona's family is hearing the other side of this legal fight. In an exclusive interview, Torres' ex-husband's attorney is now sitting with Olivia. Olivia?
Many sides to every story, of course, guys. So we're happy to have joining us this morning Claudia Work, an attorney from Campbell Law Group, who was representing John Terrell in this phase. So thank you so much for being here. You were not initially his representative as this started making its way through the courts.
Correct. I was not his trial attorney. That was Allie Stoddard. She did get in touch with me when this issue arose about when the court was looking at some sort of authority for dividing these embryos or awarding these embryos. So I did provide some guidance, and that's how I ended up being the Court of Appeals counsel and then one of the Supreme Court counsel.
So taking on a case like this, you know it's going to have massive implications, right? But at the core are 2 human beings who are having a conflict that cannot be resolved just personally, right? We hear the sound from Ruby Torres, and you know, the human reaction is feeling a lot of emotion and empathy for a woman who wants nothing but a very natural desire to become a mom. I went through in vitro fertilization. I never got to the stage of even having frozen embryos to freeze. So you know, you can relate to how disappointing it would be to ride that roller coaster. But of course for him, his rights are equally important to hers. So please tell me what brought this case forward and what his perspective is, because I imagine he feels like the bad guy, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. He's been painted as the villain in this, and really at its core, this is an issue of contract rights and, you know, dare I say it, right to choose. It's a consent issue. And the parties very clearly entered into a contract. They thought about it. This is a very long contract. They thought about all eventualities, and they made decisions before these embryos were created. They made decisions about what would happen if they got a divorce, if they broke up. At the time they were creating these embryos, they weren't actually married. So the irony of it all is this new case, or this new statute that came out, if they had not married, if they decided not to marry after they created these embryos, it wouldn't even have applied. And it doesn't apply retroactively to this case anyway. But this case was and is a contract case. These situations are contract cases when the parties clearly contracted not to use these embryos unless they were both consenting.
Both in favor of it.
Yes.
So as this progresses, and it was an unusual thing for 2 people to sit down and probably make this contract. I don't know if the fertility centers suggest it. Maybe they suggest it only to unmarried couples. I don't ever remember having a conversation about anything like that. But had they not had that contractual agreement, what would have happened in your legal opinion?
Well, I can tell you no fertility clinic is going to be involved in creating embryos without a clear contract.
Okay.
There are very many scenarios that they have to cover, and usually the fertility clinic wants to cover their behinds just in case there is a dispute that arises, because they're very often is a dispute that arises. So in the unlikely event that these parties had, you know, a mad scientist friend who was just willing to create embryos for them without going through the contractual process, then these would have been property, as they still are. They are deemed to be property. And the court would look at any agreements that the parties had as to their ownership, as to their disposition. Because contracts in Arizona don't have to be written. They don't have to have, you know, tons and tons of pages of lawyer speak in them. They can be verbal. They can just be, you know, somebody was present when we had a conversation that
and this
you
is
won't
what we
use
agreed
these.
to. What can you tell us about your client and how he's feeling now? And were there ever any hesitations, like maybe this battle is not worth fighting, or maybe I can remember how I felt at that time and wanted to plan a family at that time?
Well, obviously, you know, my client is private. My client is sort of in between a rock and a hard place. He's in a very difficult situation. It's never been about hurting Ruby. It's been about making sure that he's not forced to become a parent against his wishes, particularly when he took meticulous steps to make sure that he can't accidentally become a parent with this woman or frankly any other woman using these embryos. So that's simply what it was. He was not in a position where he wanted to become a parent at this point. He certainly did not want to become a parent with his ex, which I think a lot of people can understand and sympathize with. I mean, what if you had an ex who came forward in 5 or 10 years and said, you know, look, I'm going to do something that's going to make you be a parent.
That's going to change your life
Yeah,
as well.
and she's going to change your life. And a lot of people I've heard of talking about, well, she said she wasn't going to request child support. But that's not the only reason people don't want to take on the responsibility of being a parent. There are a lot of emotional impacts.
Right.
So.
And let me just clarify with you as we wrap up. So then these embryos will be donated. Who chooses where they go for donation? Is this for embryonic stem cell research? Is this donated to other families?
That's going to be up to the clinic.
To the clinic, okay.
Because the court order that was upheld from the trial court level was these are to be donated pursuant to the clinic protocols.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much. It really is a provocative, I mean, interesting topic. Obviously, you know, very painful for the two people involved, but an important discussion. And I imagine that you would just advise anybody who's going into this kind of thing to just be eyes wide open and very clear, right?
Very clear on their contracts, because this is going to come up again and again. This is not a case that is applicable only to this couple.
Okay.
It's going to apply to many, many couples in the future.
And even with the new law. And in that new law specifically would be for married couples. If somebody wants to utilize those embryos, then they get them.
Yes.
Okay.
That new law only applies to that, and I think that new law might be challenged in the future.
All right. Well, thank you so much. If that happens, keep us posted. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thanks.